Now that you've got some basic configuration done on both of your firewalls, we can set up a few things to make this a little bit more realistic. In this video, we're going to take a look at setting up source NAT on our first firewall so that we can reach firewall number 2 from our Windows host. After that, we're going to try to set up a remote access VPN to simulate if you had like a telecommuter or even you as the administrator needing to get back into your internal network. So first things first, let's take a look at the source NAT configuration and see if we can't get this Windows 10 machine to reach out to firewall 02. So I'm logged into the firewall. I'm just going to go into configure mode and we'll set up our source NAT. Now the way this works is we need to set up a rule set to say what addresses should be NATed, and then we need to modify a security policy to actually allow that NATed traffic to go through. I'm going to start out in edit security, NAT, and we're doing source NAT. So this will be basically a PAT or a dynamic NAT configuration. We'll create a rule set, so we'll do set rule set, and I'll just call it RS1. And we're coming from zone trust. And we're going to be going to zone untrust, so we'll do the same thing. So we'll do set rule set to zone untrust. Okay, we need to say what traffic that we're going to match. So where is it coming from? Where is it going to? So let's actually jump into this a little bit farther. So we're going to go into edit rule set RS1, and we'll go into rule R1. So save us a little bit of typing. And we'll do set match source address, and we don't care where it's coming from, and we don't really care where it's going to. And we just want it to be NATed using the outside interface's IP address. So the way we do that is we'll say, giving it a condition, source NAT interface. So it'll bind it to the untrust interface IP address that we have. Next thing that we need to do is change the security policy from zone trust to zone untrust to basically allow that NAT traffic to go through. So I'm going to jump back out to top here and we'll go into edit security policies. This is from zone trust, we said, to zone untrust. And we'll modify the policy. So I'm going to do a set policy. We'll call this policy internet access. We say we're going to match the source address of any. So we're going to allow basically any address from the trust zone to get out to any destination address. And I don't care what application they're using. So we'll set that up as any as well. So if we see any source address going to any destination address on any application from our trust zone to the untrust zone, we're just going to want to allow that. So we'll do a set policy internet access, then permit. Okay, so not too bad for the source NAT. Let's go back and do a commit check. Everything looks good. So we'll do a commit comment. I'll say configured SNAT. Okay, perfect. So what I want to do next is actually test this. So the idea here is that now that I've set up NAT, I don't need to set up any like default routes or anything like that since our two firewalls are directly connected to each other. I'm going to create a new session, and I should be able to just hit the 138.247.98.50, which would be the second firewall on their outside IP address. Perfect. So logging in as Mike, and everything looks good. And I'm going to do one thing here, so we're going to go into configure mode just so we can keep things straight. And I'm going to set the host name as firewall 2. Okay, so we got firewall 2 labeled. I better do the same thing here on firewall 1, so we'll do a set system host name and firewall 01. Okay, so we can keep those things a little bit separate now, and that should make our lives a little bit easier. So the second part of what I wanted to configure here was setting up a dynamic VPN, or as most people call them, just a remote access VPN. This is a scenario, like I said before, if you have a telecommuter, or even if you need just secure access to your internal networks, how are we going to actually go about obtaining that? Now, to kind of be fair about this warning, there's a lot of different steps that goes into this, so it's a fairly lengthy configuration and a lot of details that go into that. At a really super high level, basically what we're going to end up configuring is we'll do the remote user authentication and address management. We'll configure the VPN tunnel, and then we'll tie those two things together so we'll actually associate that dynamic VPN with the remote clients. So it just sounds like 3 steps to begin with, but really when we get into the details of these, we have to configure how the key exchanges are going to work, how the IPsec tunnel is going to work, and there's a lot of really intricate details that go about this. We'll kind of try to take it one step at a time here and talk about what each of these pieces mean, but we're going to do this all on Firewall 02. So hopefully by the end of this, our Windows 10 host that we're currently logged into can establish a VPN connection to the inside of our Firewall 02. So on Firewall 02, we're going to work on the remote user authentication and address assignment piece. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a address assignment pool. What this is going to allow us to do is when we VPN into that second firewall, we're going to set up the network that this client should be dropped into. So I'm going to go into Edit Access, Address Assignment, and we'll start to configure some of this. I'm going to call my address pool, we'll do a set pool, we'll just call this Dynamic VPN. Address pool. Okay, so this is what our clients are going to get dropped into as soon as they connect here. So set pool, Dynamic VPN, address pool. I need to set up the network for those clients that are VPNing into. So we'll do a family iNet network. And we can just choose something simple like a 10.10.10.0/24. Okay, and we can set up different attributes about that pool as well. So once they're authenticated to it, we can modify their DNS settings, things like that. So for example, if I did iNet, we can do the XAuth attributes, which are basic attributes, like I said, after they get authenticated to this, what's really going to happen. So we might set something up like their primary DNS to be, I don't know, we could use Google's DNS or you could use your own internal DNS. Really doesn't matter there. Okay, so not too bad. So when the user gets logged in, if we just do a show here, they're going to be dropped onto the 10.10.10.0 network, and they're going to be given the primary DNS server of 8.8.8.8. Next thing I want to do is create the XAuth profile, and this is where I get to create user accounts and passwords for them. And then I get to tell those user accounts which pool that they're going to be assigned to upon successful authentication. So back up at the top, I'm going to go back into Edit. So we'll go Top, drop back into Edit Access, and we create what's called a access profile. So I'll do a set profile. I can call this, just to kind of keep the naming a little bit standard, Dynamic VPN access profile. We're creating clients. We're going to create a user account for each of those clients. Right? If you had a large network, a lot of people VPNing in, you might want to tie this to a radius server. But since we don't have many, we'll just go client, and we can just give them a name like client1, and we'll create them as firewall users and set them up with a password. So any password will work. We could just choose something simple like we've been doing so far. And so when they want to VPN into the firewall, they'll use password1bang. Trying to create another user account, super simple. Just change user accounts. So we could have client1, client2. These are both created with the same password. Now the last thing I need to do is specify what pool, so the pool that we just created these users will be dropped into. So we'll do the address assignment pool, and we'll do the Dynamic VPN address pool. Okay, last thing I need to do is set up the web authentication to use the XAuth profile that we've just set up here. So I'm going to go one level further down into the config, so I'll do it into the edit access, and then we'll go to the firewall authentication. We'll kind of set up how this should work. So we'll do set web authentication, and we can tie that to the default profile that we just made, which is our Dynamic VPN access profile. Okay, so let's go to the top here and just kind of walk through what we had just set up. So if I do a show access, what we can see here is that we've set up a few different things. We've got our access profile with 2 users, and those users are going to be dropped into the VPN address pool. That VPN address pool's configuration is right here. And we can see how they're going to be authenticating. So really that was kind of part 1 of this sort of 3-step process. Now part 2 is where we configure the VPN tunnel, and there's a lot that goes into this. We're mostly working with the key exchanges here. We're going to set up the IPsec part. We need to modify our security zone policies and make sure that our zones are allowing the correct protocols and things inbound. Now, before we get too far into this, I don't have a second interface set up for the inside network here, so I'm going to go configure that quick, and then we'll jump back to this VPN tunnel configuration. So I'm going to do set interfaces, and this will be GE001 unit 0 family INET address, and I want this to be, we can just do something like 10.0.0.1/24. We can modify the policies and firewall rules a little bit later on as we need to. So from edit mode, we're going to go into first our IKE policy. So let's do set security IKE policy, and we'll just give it a name, so kind of like what we've been doing previously. So I'll go IKE Dynamic VPN policy. And actually, since we're going to have a few commands in here, I'm going to change this from set. We're going to go into edit. Save ourselves a little bit of typing there. So we'll do set. We can see some of the attributes that we can change about it. There's not really a ton that we're going to need to do in here. We're basically going to set the mode, the proposal set, and the pre-shared key are the 3 attributes we're going to modify. So starting at the top, we'll go set mode, and we want this to be aggressive mode. It's kind of a standard that we use for IKE, especially when we're using pre-shared keys. So we'll go set mode aggressive, set the proposal set, and we're just going to go with standard. Standard. And last thing we need to do there is set the pre-shared key. So we have a few ways we can enter this. I'm just going to set it in as ASCII text. And you can choose any pre-shared key you'd like. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just kind of keep things like we've been doing with password one bang. And that should be good. So that's the VPN policy. The next thing that we need to do is set up the IKE gateway. And here we set up things like the host name, our connection limit, the user types for IKE, what our external interface is going to be, and then we tie it back to that access profile that we'd previously created in that first step. So let's go up a couple of levels. So I'm going to go into Edit IKE Gateway, and we'll give it a name, so Dynamic VPN Gateway. So we'll drop down into that edit mode, and we can start to set up those attributes we just talked about. So first thing I want to do is set my IKE policy. So IKE policy, and we just created that, so IKE Dynamic VPN policy. We're going to set up the host name, so set dynamic host name, and we can just call it something like Dynamic VPN. We'll set our connection limit, so set dynamic connections limit. So how many users can we actually have connected to this gateway? Now just a word of note here too, that you are a little bit limited by the license that you have on this. So even though I'm setting this to 10, depending on what license we actually have installed on this SRX, you might be limited to something more like 2, but there's of course different levels of that. So we'll set it up for 10. We can go back and check the licensing later on as well. So we'll set what kind of users we're going to have. So the dynamic IKE user type, we'll just set these up as the group IKE ID. Okay, our external interface comes next. So set external interface, and of course our outside interface on this firewall we determined was 000.0, so where we're expecting the actual users to enter into the firewall at. Last part of the gateway here is we tie it back to that dynamic VPN access profile. So it was our XAuth access profile, and we'd call that dynamic VPN access profile. Okay, so a lot of different commands there, and that was basically just to set up the IKE part. Next up, we set the IPsec part, followed by the security policies and the security zones. So let's go back up to the security level. So I'm just going to go top, and we'll go to Edit, Security, IPsec, and we'll configure a few things here. Within IPsec, we add in the our gateway that we just created. We'll create a policy for it, and then we'll have our IPsec dynamic VPN policy here as well. So starting with that, we'll go into, we'll do set policy. So we're in IPsec, so we should do set policy. Well, let's call this IPsec. Policy, let's see here. So let's find our level. So we're in Edit, Security, IPsec. Okay, so we have a set policy. And we'll just give it a name here. So let's call it IPsec Dynamic VPN policy. Perfect. So set IPsec policy, we give it the name, then we'll set the proposal set, kind of like we had done with the IKE part, to standard. Okay, then we set up our gateway, so we'll do set VPN dynamic VPN, and we do our IKE gateway. So we'd previously configured this in the IKE steps, which was just dynamic VPN gateway. Okay, last thing we need to do is set the IPsec dynamic VPN policy. So we'll do set VPN dynamic VPN IKE IPsec policy, which we just created here a couple commands ago, which IPsec dynamic VPN policy. Okay, so we've configured IKE, we've configured IPsec. Now we need to modify our zones a little bit here to allow this VPN traffic from the untrust zone to come into the trust zone. That being the point of we want these remote users to have secured access to our internal networks. So we're going to jump out of IPsec, so just back at Edit Security, and we're going to go into our policies. So we have a little bit deeper command. So I'm going to go Edit, Policies, from Zone, Untrust, which is our outside zone, to Zone Trust, and we're going to create a policy within this called Dynamic VPN Policy. So what should happen when our hosts match this dynamic VPN policy? First thing we need to do is identify what traffic is going to fall within this policy. So to do that, I'm going to go with the source address of any. We don't really know where our users are going to be coming from. The destination address, we don't really know where they're going to within that local zone here, so we can configure that a little bit later on. We don't care what application they're using, so we'll do a set match. Application, and we're just going to permit this traffic. So do a set, then permit. We're going to permit it over the IPsec VPN tunnel as the dynamic VPN. Perfect. So we're allowing this traffic, but it's going to be specifically allowed over that VPN tunnel. Now the next thing that I want to do is modify our untrust zone and make sure that we allow IKE, HTTPS, and ping within that. So I'm going to go back to top, and we'll do edit security zones. And we're going to go back into the untrust zone. And we should already have our interface in there, so gig00.0. We're modifying our host inbound traffic, pulling from the list of system services. So just want to set these services up that we're going to need. If I do a show, we can see that we have HTTP, HTTPS, SSH, Telnet, and DHCP. I also want to add IKE, so we need to be able to establish that tunnel and do the key exchange. And we're going to do ping as well, just so we can do a little bit of testing. So did a lot of steps there for that second part. Configured the IKE policy, the IKE gateway. We configured IPsec, the security policy, and just allowed this host inbound traffic. That's probably the worst of all of those. We're moving on to that third step here, and then we'll be able to test it in just a second. So the last step that we have of this kind of three-part series is the association of the dynamic VPN with our remote clients. So I'm going to go back to top, and we're going to go into our security dynamic VPN. We can tie these things together, so we're going to set up the access profile. All right, so what have we got? So in our edit security dynamic VPN, set access. Maybe we have gone off the rails here. Let's see what we're getting. So if we do a set, we should have access profile in here. Let's take a look here. Let me grab a quick power cord. Notice my laptop is also dying, so we got kind of a couple things going. I'm going to pause this real quick and then get a charger and quick figure out what we've got going with this. Alrighty, so I'm back here and the laptop is plugged in, and I did a little checking in the background just to make sure we're making good use of time in the video. And came up with some kind of unfortunate news about using the virtual firewalls that we have right now. So basically the part I was going to have you guys walk through is creating what's called an access profile. And that was going to kind of tie everything back together. And I can show you what that looks like. It would have been basically this part here. So we would have created a access profile, and we would have tied that to our dynamic VPN, associated our clients with it, given them access to our internal protected resources, and we would have been able to establish this VPN. What I ran into here is when I was in edit security, if we do a set question mark, we're missing the command dynamic-VPN to actually go create that access profile. So after a little bit more digging, what I had kind of looked at here is if I just exit out of this, and we can exit with those. If we do a show version, we see that we're on Firefly perimeter 12.1x47. It found out they actually have removed the Dynamic VPN in a couple versions ago. I think it was 12.1x45 or x44 that they actually took away that functionality from us. So, mystery as to why we weren't able to get that command to go previously is the feature no longer exists in here. So the next steps we would have done is down here you guys have the Pulse client installed, and you can basically just add a connection. We would change it to our SRX and then give it the IP address of our remote client, and all of that would have connected. Now on the real SRXs, you do get 2 free Dynamic VPN licenses. So if we're doing this on a real device, that would have gone through and worked. The other thing I was going to show you, since we went through that whole configuration, was the little bit easier way that we could have gone about this. And it's still good to look at anyhow. If you go to Configure, IPsec VPN, you can see all the pieces that we put together, and it makes maybe a little bit more sense once we start to look at them. So we had like our phases of IKE, so you can see our gateway that we had, our policy, and the standard proposal would be there. All of our phase 2 parts of IPsec were in here as well, so we can kind of look at those. The problem that we run into, though, again, is when you go to Dynamic VPN, it says please specify an access profile, which is fine. So if you go to the global settings, we can map everything that we had together, but as soon as you hit OK, we get the same problem where basically that command was missing, so we get the syntax errors there. So not the result I was going for when we started this video out, but I think hopefully you still got a little bit out of the kind of major parts of setting up that VPN and can kind of see how these pieces would fit together for those last few steps. So all for now. We will come back with another topic and hopefully not be limited by some of the virtual appliances that we've got, but all for now.